engine oil pressure is critical. Engine damage may occur.
5 years to find this car. Now I know what you're thinking. Neil, this is just a regular J-body Lebaron. These can be found all day, every day on Facebook Marketplace. Well, that's where you're wrong. This is a J-body hardtop Lebaron, 2 doors, so it's a 2-door coupe, with the digital dash, the electronic voice alert, and a 5-speed manual transmission. So this car is fully optioned out, except for the transmission, the sunroof, which is honestly a blessing in disguise, and the Infinity sound system. And did I mention it's a turbo? And I probably could have gotten this car sooner. They're not impossible to find, but I picked this one up for $1,600. I played the long game here. I'm a bit of an opportunist when it comes to pricing. I don't have to have it right then and there. I waited for one to come up that needed a little bit of work, that was priced to sell, and that's what happened here. So this beautiful car, it needed brake lines and a couple other things, as you'll see in this episode, and it wasn't too much to get it back on the road, but it is a turbo Dodge, or turbo Chrysler in the case of this, it's a Chrysler, and these just, they have weird problems that never go away. So this is only part 1 of an entire series, I assume. I don't think it's going to be as easy as putting brake lines and a few pilot lamps in the dash here. This is a turbo Dodge / Chrysler. So please
fasten your seatbelts.
It's going to be a wild ride. As with all my sound purchases, it began with a drink from the Big Yingling and a trip to the online Facebook Marketplace for a look at the local Lebaron offerings in the area. Every few weeks I like to sweep Facebook Marketplace to see what cars that I would be interested in are going for, and if any deals or changes in prices come up that might warrant buying something. The more I browsed, the farther away and less feasible the listings became, but then something caught my eye. It's never easy to tell if something is in good shape based on the listing photos alone, and despite visible shortcomings, the car looked incredibly promising, and I quickly spotted that it was manual. There were just enough photo angles of the car that I didn't suspect the owner was trying to hide anything, but it still just felt too good to be true with the low asking price. Because it had the digital dash, I decided to reach out to the seller to determine if it was a talking car. And when I heard back that it was, I decided that I would need to take a trip to Pennsylvania to look at the car and bring myself closure. After about a 4-hour drive, mentally preparing myself to negotiate, I arrived in the Allentown, Pennsylvania area and took a look at the car. Almost immediately, I knew I had struck gold and forgot all about having to negotiate. I took it for a short drive up and down the street, accepted that it had a few easily addressable issues, and quickly pulled out the cash and completed the transaction. The discoloration in the carpet that I thought was mold was actually just red dye fading in the sun, and the car had almost no moisture odor to it. I also did not immediately realize that I was going to be given an entire truck bed worth of spare parts to take home, including unfaded floor carpet and an entire head with an extra Garrett turbocharger. Once everything was loaded up, I visited a couple friends in nearby New Jersey and then drove about 4 hours back to Virginia. And within 24 hours, I started to go through the car. The first order of business was to clean the interior of the car out as thoroughly as possible. While the previous owner took care to cover the back seats to protect them from the sun, it most likely was never vacuumed or detailed over the last decade as it sat waiting for repairs. So we'll start by thoroughly vacuuming the interior. After the vehicle is vacuumed, we can use some interior cleaning products to wipe up any dirt and dust that has accumulated. In the future, we'll take the vehicle to my buddy Zach for a proper detail, but I wanted to get as much out of the car as possible to really allow him to focus on revitalizing the more faded plastics and exterior paint. I try to use automotive cleaning products that are relatively mild and safe for multiple material types, but unfortunately, between the cleaning action of the foaming interior cleaner that I'm using and the silk screening Chrysler used, some of the lettering on the turn signal stalk wiped off rather easily. Luckily, I caught it almost immediately and exercised caution on any remaining silk screening inside the vehicle. Once the interior was as clean as I could get it with the products I have on hand, we can move to the outside and try to take some of the oxidization out of the paint. Since this car was repainted about 20 years ago, my hope is that the paint is not only thicker than factory, but that it will also shine up better too. After just one pass with cut compound, it unfortunately became apparent that there was either no clear coat left, or the vehicle was resprayed as cheaply as possible using a single stage paint system with no clear coat. Either way, we can still make the paint significantly shinier than it was, but it will not have as brilliant of a shine as if it had clear coat. With a little bit more work and multiple passes and compounds, you can see a noticeable difference in shine to the paint. But before we continue to polish it any further, I want Zach to assess the condition of the paint and determine the paint thickness. If there's a lot of paint to work with, we can get a little bit more aggressive with the polishes and hopefully get a near mirror finish out of the paint without having to repaint and clear coat the car. One month is ideally the longest a car should sit without being driven or at least started. Luckily, the previous owner knew this and ran it every few weeks while it sat waiting for service over the past decade. But there were still problems that caused it to be taken off of the road in the first place, particularly with the brake system. Before we fix anything else, we need to get the car stopping correctly. A brief test drive indicated very weak braking power on some or all of the wheels, and the pedal did not feel right, so we can start by switching out the master cylinder with a known good one. And this is where the real problems really begin. While removing the brake lines from the master cylinder, it has become clear that we'll also need to fabricate and replace new brake lines anywhere that the flared brake lines have corroded to their fittings. Luckily, I had purchased a brake line flaring tool early in the S10 V8 swap project, as I needed to make my own clutch line for the T5 transmission. So I already had some experience with this exercise before and had the correct size line left over as well. Aside from the brake flaring tool, to do this properly, we will need a tubing bender and a pipe cutting tool. I have the latter, so to make the bends in the new line without a tubing bender, we'll hold the new line against the old line and bend it by hand to match the two. It is crucial that while bending by hand that you do so in a way that the line does not crease or collapse on itself. So it is better to make wider bends and carefully massage the bend into the line. These brake line bending tools are not that expensive, so if you plan on doing this kind of work more than once, it's well worth the investment. Especially if you spent the money on a flaring kit to begin with. Once the line is bent to shape, I always leave a little extra at the ends to allow for some adjustment later. Off camera, I did a quick check to make sure the length of these lines are correct, and once this is done, we can slip the threaded fittings over the line and flare the ends. Definitely make sure to add the fittings before you flare the lines, as you won't be able to do this the other way around. With the master cylinder swapped out and the new lines connected, I attempted to bleed the rear brakes off camera and discovered that the rear left wheel cylinder would not bleed at all. Unfortunately, this resulted in a lot more of the same twisted brake line issues while trying to remove individual brake components, so we will repeat this brake line bending exercise for the rear left brake circuit and replace any soft hoses along the way while the hard lines are removed. After another short drive around the neighborhood, it was clear that the car was still unfortunately stopping exactly the same as it did before. So we'll take a look at the front brakes next. Since these front calipers look incredibly rusted out and the bleeder screws on both snapped off, I opted to just replace all of the front brake hardware outright. It was not until after these calipers were replaced that the car finally stopped as it should. With the brakes finally working, we can move on to some of the more fun items that still need to be fixed. Like many cars from this era, the Lebaron came equipped with flippy headlights, and like many cars from this era, the plastics used in mechanical assemblies were anything short of adequate, with critical components often either cracking, warping, or outright disintegrating with age. Luckily, there is an inexpensive fix for this headlight motor, which involves purchasing a replacement bushing kit on eBay for about $15. The repair itself is fairly straightforward. We just have to open the gearbox of the window motor and remove this spur gear. And as you can see, the bushings that were in there look a lot like sawdust or corn feed. With all of the forbidden corn grain removed, installation of the new parts is pretty straightforward. We just have to install these 3 bushings, add some grease, and reassemble the gearbox with the new seal. Once the motor is assembled, we can put it back in the front grille of the vehicle and test the operation of the headlights. I don't see any kind of limit switch mechanism, so we'll also manually close the headlight covers, as the logic circuit that controls this motor is going to most likely assume that the headlights are in the closed position. After that, we can test the operation. And it would probably be ideal to plug the motor back into the wiring harness before doing so. And just like that, it looks like we have proper operation of the headlight covers. Shortly after making this repair, I took the car out for a drive and had the passenger side window stop working after rolling it up. When I removed the motor from the door, I realized that it had a similar shape to the headlight motor, so I opened it up and sure enough it uses the same bushing design. While I knew exactly what kit to order for the headlight motor, it was less clear what bushing kit would fit this window motor. So I took it with me to Lowe's and found some bushings that fit in their hardware section, or at least closely fit after being cut down to the correct depth. Eventually I will order the correct kit to make the repair, but at least for now the window can be raised and lowered again with minimal slippage. While making these repairs, I wanted to know why the headlight motor and window motor would both incorporate a design where the motor does not directly drive the motor assembly output. It turns out that it's a safety feature to protect your fingers, and probably to protect the motor from stripping out the gears in the assembly or any linkages downstream of the assembly as well. In the event that the motor outpowers the abilities of the gear drive, mechanical linkages, or the structural integrity of your finger, these bushings will slip instead. Also on the topic of inadequate materials, almost every button in this car will need to be replaced, particularly the buttons on the trip computer, vehicle information center, and the climate controls. We'll start with the trip computer, which has a total of 12 buttons. The factory buttons have a soft key feel to them. However, the Lebaron community has been using a more tactile replacement switch with the same pin layout and overall height dimension. I assume this is for cost and or longevity, but I haven't looked into it that much. Replacement of these buttons is easy as they are only held in with 2 pins, and the replacement height is dimensionally similar, so there's no need to make any adjustments to the button mounting height or the faceplate. However, some enthusiasts opt to add a little bit of foam between the buttons and the faceplate to remove any play and to keep them from jiggling around while driving. I actually ended up with 3 of these trip computers, so I ended up replacing the buttons in all 3 of them since these button failures are such a widespread issue. I will probably end up keeping one of these trip computers and offering the other for sale when someone else in the community needs it. For the climate controls, the procedure is more or less the same, but the buttons they chose from the factory more closely resemble the tactile replacement switches. These buttons are also of the 4-pin variation, so I ordered some in this configuration as well. The upside of a switch with 4 pins is that it is easier to center on the pad. However, desoldering the existing switch and cleaning up the pad is a little bit more challenging. Where it took about 20 minutes to do 12 2-pin switches, it took me over an hour to do 10 of these 4-pin switches. When I removed the aftermarket stereo and reinstalled the factory radio, I noticed the volume adjustment would crackle noticeably, but it still wasn't bad as other radios I've seen in the past. In fact, the more I played with it, the more it improved. But since I wanted to check the pilot lamps anyway, we'll open up the radio and take a look around. One thing we can do while we're in here is spray Deoxit on all of the knobs and sliders. Deoxit is an excellent product to use on knobs, sliders, and selector switches of older analog and early digital electronics that still power on, but maybe aren't working as good as they could. I've also tried it on the cartridge slot of my Nintendo 64 with great results. Games will switch on the first time every time, and the cartridge doesn't have to be reseated. This product does as the name suggests, by removing surface oxidation from contact surfaces and the inside of potentiometers and sliders, whose surfaces are all exposed to atmospheric oxygen and moisture. The most recognizable symptom of this oxidation is a very loud crackle when adjusting something like a volume knob or a mode selector switch that works intermittently or not at all. We can also replace the pilot lamps inside of these other components using a standard T5 bulb. Replacing these lamps was actually easier than trying to buy them in quantities of more than 1 for a reasonable price without them being LEDs. While LEDs would probably illuminate these components just fine, I wanted the color and brightness to be as authentic as possible, and also wasn't sure how dimmable some of these cheaper LEDs actually are, even if they are advertised as being dimmable. These LEDs are usually also cheaply manufactured by everyone's favorite industrial country, which is known for making LED products with quantity over quality. And opening up the dash to replace the same bulb multiple times is something I don't want to do. To finish off this episode, I want to cut a spare key for the Lebaron as I only received 1 set of keys in the sale. The day after buying the car, I went to Home Depot with the intention of getting a quick set made, but apparently they didn't want to take my money because I waited at the key desk for 30 minutes and no one came to cut the key. So we'll take matters into our own hands and cut one at home. I reached out to a member of the Chrysler community that carries a large stock of new old stock keys and managed to track down the correct OEM key blanks for the 1987 model year. Usually this guy makes me a perfectly coded Chrysler key from a close-up photo, but I was told that the single-sided keys are a little harder to decode from a photograph without sending him the only key I have, so he agreed to sell me the blank keys so I could cut them at home myself. Setup of the original and blank keys is crucial to a proper copy. It is very important to move the carrier across the blank and compare it to the locations of the 2 keys before turning the machine on. Any variation in horizontal or vertical position could make use of the key difficult or impossible. The 1987 Lebaron uses two keys, one that operates the doors and ignition, and one that operates the trunk lock. This allows the trunk to be locked out in a valet situation. So we'll actually perform the copying process for two different keys, starting with the ignition key. As you can see, this process is incredibly simple for a single-sided key. For a double-sided key, the process is more or less the same, but you would flip the new key over once one side was cut and make sure that it lined up exactly how it was before on the second side, and then make the cut again. This is why I try and opt to have double-sided keys coated with a key nibbler instead of copied with this style machine whenever possible, as it ensures both sides of the key are cut accurately to code. But we'll save that process for another car. So as you can see, it needed a decent bit of work to get it back on the road, but really not as much as I was expecting. This car runs and drives fantastic now, and while it still has a few issues, it still kind of misfires or cuts power, we're off to a great start. It runs great, it idles great, it sounds great. The turbo sounds great. So I really think this car has a lot more potential, and I hope you'll stick around. I was not expecting to buy one this year. This was pure luck, and I even got this super awesome vanity tag to go with it. Someone saw this tag on my social media, and they said they tried to get it in Virginia a few years ago, and it was not available then. So I guess I just got double lucky. I got the car, I got the vanity tag. So it's been a really great experience so far, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And as always, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, why not consider subscribing? We got a lot more to do on this car, and we have a bunch of other projects on this channel as well that you may also like. So we'll see you in the next video. Thanks again.
Please close your passenger door. Please close your driver door. Your engine oil pressure is critical. Engine damage may occur. Your engine temperature is above normal. Please check your engine coolant level. Please check your fuel level. Your charging system is malfunctioning. Prompt service is required. Please check your brake fluid level. Please check your disc brake pads. Your washer fluid is low. Please check your headlamps. Please check your brake lamps. Please check your tail lamps. Your parking brake is on. Your keys are in the ignition. Your headlamps are on.